Okay, so we'll begin by doing this chant. We'll do it 4 times, and we'll do call and response. And so you can unmute yourselves for this portion of the program. Neb medu, neb jedu, Verda sutaha nectadu dem diu.
Emedu, Nechedu, Erasudaha Neterudem Diu.
Neb medu, neb jedu, Verda sutaha nectadu dem diu.
Nemedu, Nebjedu, Erasudaha Neterudem Diu.
Neb medu, neb jedu, Verda sutaha nectadu dem diu.
Nemedu, Nebjedu, Erasudaha Neterudem Diu.
Neb medu, neb jedu, Verda sutaha nectadu dem diu.
Nemedu, Nebjedu, Erasudaha Neterudem Diu.
Om Hatap, 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 Hatap. All words spoken about me from outside of me, others saying things about me and also from inside me, negative, egoistic self-talk based on fear, anger, insecurity, frustration, etc. The Neteru, those gods and goddesses, together they stand up for me on my behalf. And later in the program, we'll do more of a detailed examination of this Hekal, and you'll see how it relates. I'm sure you have a hint already. So I've asked, or I invited others as a humanitarian gesture to participate in this program with the Sunu group. The Sunu are a group of practitioners who have already gone through a 4-part training in ancient Egyptian healing art, and they're now doing a continuing education. And I decided to prepare this and to present it earlier this week. I came up with the idea, and I figured it would be good to invite others as well, because this is the elephant in the room. And I found that this topic, most people are not willing to discuss it. And the people who are willing to discuss it are people who are overtly affected by it. Mostly. Those are the people that are willing to talk about it. And it's like a family secret that everyone wants to push under the rug. And was it Morgan Freeman that said, if you want to stop racism, don't talk about it. And that's like if your husband or your wife is beating you, don't say anything, don't talk about it. Just keep taking the beating, and hopefully one day it'll go away. If we don't talk about it, we don't understand it. We don't know how it affects our lives. Then how we'll be able to go beyond it. Now, for people of African descent, ever since even during the time of slavery and during the period of Reconstruction and after Reconstruction, and certainly during the civil rights era in the United States, the people in the African American community took on the brunt of confronting white supremacy and racism in the United States and around the globe, actually. And scholars who are studying this and are taking sort of a different tack, you're saying that it's not the responsibility of the people who are suffering from it to change it. It is their responsibility to let known what the issue is. Because the structure, system, people who designed it, they're the ones, the burden should be on them to dismantle it. So it's sort of like an alcoholic who is terrorizing his family. He will not change until he wants to change or she wants to change. The family can tell him, hey, this is what's going on, and things are crazy. But it's up upon him to go to AA and say, I'm an alcoholic and I want to change. And pretty much you have the condition of a dysfunctional, abusive relationship, which was very damaging, physically damaging during slavery and during Reconstruction and Jim Crow. But the effects of all of that are still being experienced by the marginalized group, in particularly those of African descent, recent African descent, call them African Americans or African Caribbean or whatever. And those people, those strong leaders who oppose white supremacy and who oppose white supremacy with a wider humanitarian view, they were murdered. The term is assassinated, the technical term, but basically it was a broad daylight murder. You're talking about like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and Marcus Garvey, who started the Back to Africa movement with the Black Star Line. He was ostracized, kicked out, jailed, deported back to Jamaica. He died much younger than he could have lived. It's a serious problem. You'll see the problem is the racism is sort of like a pathogen in the society. And without treating that illness, the society will continue to deteriorate, and that's what's happening. Because scholars have shown that white supremacy does not only affect humans who are dark-skinned, but it also affects the planet itself. And so climate change is a direct result of white supremacy. And people don't make the link, but the link is there. However, since we are a Suna group, we're going to talk mostly about how this affects human health. And many studies have been done to show how living in an oppressive environment relates to negative health outcomes, actually. And since we are all living in this environment, we all have been affected by racism in some way. Even if you're certainly if you have had an association with a dark-skinned male, or you have a dark-skinned male as a child, you've certainly been affected by racism. whether one realizes it or not, because it can be very subtle and insidious. And then with the microaggressions and the jokes and things like that. And so it can become a very stressful environment for people to live in without even realizing that it's environment. It's a stressful environment. They're just living, going about their day-to-day life, thinking that's how the way things are. Hopefully it'll change. But they have no idea how actually it's affecting their health. And we as healers, we should be aware of these issues for ourselves and for others, so that when we're working with people, we have a broader view of the issue of health, more than just the empirical or the didactic aspects of, a person has high blood pressure. And you said the high blood pressure came from the diet, but why is the diet the way it is? And why is the diet the way it is? Why are people eating the way they are? Why are people overeating? What stressors are causing them to overeat? It could be lack of self-esteem because of living in an oppressive society. And so all of these issues have been studied vigorously. And I've actually shown the correlation between negative health outcomes and living in an oppressive society. So it makes racism very insidious and very pervasive. It's there. You might say you can't feel it, you're not experiencing it, but it's there, and you are being affected by it. Even if you're amongst the Caucasian group, because if you're Caucasian and you're living in an environment that is being polluted by let's say explosion of a train, and the toxins of the train goes into the groundwater, and now you are living in an environment with toxic water, well, you are a victim of white supremacy. Because the principle of white supremacy is dominance over all others, that they are the arbiter over all others. That includes the earth. And there was something interesting occurred during our Reconstruction. When the slaves became free, the poorer class of whites took on the identity of being white very strongly, because it gave them a social standing above those who were considered Black. And so they themselves, by identifying, by being white, by virtue of this desire or need to experience or feel that they're better than the other, they are also practitioners of white supremacy and racism. And this actually showed itself in a very acute and damaging way when people who were formerly slaves started to work together, actually. And if you are among the slave class and you are doing all the work, and you're creating and making all the inventions, and you're being tested day-to-day life in a very intense manner, when you gain a certain kind of freedom, liberation, and you join forces with others who have also been tested in the same way, you have a special capacity to endure and to create and to develop in a scale that the oppressive class cannot, because they weren't being really tested by life in the same way that the oppressive class was being tested by life. The ones who were doing the oppressing, they were imposing their egoistic will and desires on the others and making them do all the work. So the oppressive class didn't, their cognitive process was not the same as a person who is in the field trying to make how to think to make the work easier, per se. So directly after slavery, during Reconstruction, the Blacks, the people of dark skin, the former slaves, and their children that were just coming up started to create communities for themselves, and wonderful, bustling communities where they had stores, medical care, pharmacies, you name it. People were well-dressed, well-fed, well-educated. They were doing well for themselves. That you might think that they would not be doing well because they were just coming out of slavery. And yet they were doing very well. And many of these communities and these towns were actually destroyed and burned to the ground by the whites, the poorer whites, because of jealousy, because of envy, because of racism, how racism indoctrinates the mind and causes people to act in ways that are very unhealthy to others and themselves. And so since Reconstruction, the darker skinned humans, the so-called Blacks, they have been under a certain kind of pressure that the other groups, the group who have all the, you could say the group who is among the oppressive class, the privileged group. And so the Blacks stopped building their communities because they were being burned down. And the Blacks stopped putting forth their leaders because they were being murdered. So now the Black community is in this strange place in their history ever since they became slaves. Yeah, they're not really building for themselves and like how they were doing, and they're not really putting out their leaders. But there is a kind of air. There's still an air of resistance. It's kind of an interesting way how things have turned out. And they don't want their leaders to be murdered. And some of their leaders have become corrupt. So it doesn't make sense to put them out as leaders. I'm saying that to give the general idea of the large ramification of slavery and how and racism and how racism has impacted the life of every human being, actually. And to go over some general themes. Anti-Black racism. Actually, let's do this video. So we have to go over to YouTube. And this is a video from the CDC. And if the CDC is saying it, you know it's an issue.
Most Americans want to live in a world that is fair. Most Americans want to live in a world that is fair and just. Unfortunately, in our society, many policies and practices give unfair advantages to some people over others based on their race. Race is a way our society groups together people with certain physical characteristics, like the color of their skin, Race is not about people's biology or genes.
We've all heard of racism, but we may not realize that racism is more than people treating other people unfairly because of their race, language, or culture. Racism includes the systems, policies, and practices that unequally hurt or disadvantage people who are not seen as white. Some people might think these things are in our past, but even today, there are still policies in place that harm people who are not regarded as white. And some policies have had lasting harmful effects on people depending on their race and ethnicity. For example, unfair housing policies have led to conditions today where people of color are more likely than people who are white to live in communities without access to healthy foods, public transportation, healthy homes, quality education, safe places for recreation and physical activity, and good medical care. Where we live, work, learn, and play impacts our health and well-being.
While a person's race does not increase their risk for poor health outcomes, race is a marker or a sign of other factors in our society that increase the risk for negative health outcomes. For example, research shows that people in some racial and ethnic minority groups in the US have higher rates of diabetes, hypertension, obesity, asthma, and heart disease than white people, which is due in a large part to the systems, policies, and practices in our country that make it more difficult for many people of color to be as healthy as possible. We see racial and ethnic differences in health due to differences in how people are treated in society.
So what can we do to eliminate racial and ethnic differences in health?
Public health professionals and communities must continue to conduct and share research about how racism impacts health, develop effective interventions that counter racism, and develop and support policies across sectors like transportation, education, and housing that eliminate racism and its effects on health.
To build a better nation for everyone, we must commit to understanding and changing unfair and racist policies and practices that prevent us from achieving our best health as individuals, communities, and a nation.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Preventive Medicine Grant.
So that was a statement by the CDC that's acknowledging that racism has negative impacts. But the important thing to get from that is the structure of racism at this point, and not so much of an individual encounter with racism on a day-to-day basis, but the structures and the policies that have been put in place that are causing such serious racial disparities. There is a case of a young boy, actually. And if you have ever been around children, you know how tender they are, especially boys. It's kind of a misnomer that boys are tough, like when they're horse playing and things like that, yes. But boys are tender emotionally, especially in their pre-teen years. And there was and I was saying that to show you how horrific the result can be. So there was a 12-year-old boy, his name was Tamir Rice. And he was just playing with his gun, walking down the street in a park near where his parents live. And someone called the police and said there's someone with a gun walking around. And the police showed up, and within a second, actually, they shot the kid in his chest and killed the kid. So if you don't have a safe environment in which to recreate, then the evil of racism can rear its head in a way that's very acute and very damaging. And also there was the case of redlining in the 50s, 60s, and 70s even, where the government would allocate certain areas where the Blacks would live and certain areas where the whites would live, and they would create covenants that the Blacks could not live in certain areas, and the covenants would be written in the contract. So certain areas, the Blacks could not rent or own homes, but in other areas, like in Miami, actually, the city of Overtown, Liberty City, was a bustling, thriving community before the community was actually physically torn down. The government passed a resolution, a law that they wanted to put up. I believe it's I-95, the expressway that goes over Overtown, Liberty City. And where the expressway was going to be, there were homes. And the government confiscated the people's homes and knocked there are videos of it, actually knocked the people's homes down, threw the people out of their homes, and turned that area into streets and into an overpass. And that destroyed the economic structure, the economic foundation of the community. So racism is a systemic issue. It's ingrained into the structure of the society. And it's actually ingrained into the structure of the government. The governmental policies that create these laws and policies that negatively affect people. And imagine what your life would be if you're living in a home, in a thriving community, and the next day you have nowhere to go. And literally that's what happened. People had nowhere to go. What is that going to do to your blood pressure? What is that going to do to your stress level, your cortisol level, the adrenal hormone, the cardiac output of your heart, your ejection fraction, your blood pressure, being under all of that stress. And then that stress causes people not to focus so much on other things, such as recreation, getting exercise, taking care of yourself, taking time for meditation, taking time for relaxation, going for walks. And also taking time for education. So it damages, that kind of practice damages all facets of life. So people are not focused on education and not so focused on themselves, getting healthy, because they have to find a place to live. And therefore it negatively affects the health. And so if we understand anything about epigenetics, when the mother is going through that kind of stress, and the child is with the mother's and the parents' reaction to that stress is actually forming the neuronal synapse pathways of the brain of the child. So the child is being stressed through the parents, and those children grow up to develop certain addictions. Could be addiction to alcohol, could be addiction to working, could be addiction to cigarettes, could be addiction to food. Whatever the addiction is, it has its genesis in the interaction of the child with the parent who is under stress. And the parent is not evil. The parent is doing the best they can with this difficult situation. And so that kind of neuronal pathway synapse construction gets passed down from generation to generation. Because then the next generation are going to see their parents overworked, overstressed, addicted to whatever. And then if it gets really insidious, the government is going to come into your community and put crack cocaine there. And instead of treating it as a mental health or a chemical health issue, they're going to criminalize it. And if you get caught with crack, you don't go to a treatment center, as they're doing with opioids now. You go to jail. And then you take the men out of the community and you put them in the jails. And actually, and that happened during the 80s and 90s. And that was actually happening before the 80s and 90s, during the period of Reconstruction, where they created laws that vagrancy laws. And at the time slavery was disbanded, they said they wrote this in law, a person could not be a slave unless they were committed of a crime. So they created petty crimes, such as vagrancy, such as loitering, so that just to get Black men in jail so that they can continue to work for the government. It's a governmental system. And that continues. Studies have shown that in poor communities where the people are darker skinned, they get stopped by the cops for traffic violations like 10 times more than their Caucasian counterparts. And when you get a traffic violation, you have to pay money, so that they're going to the poorest communities and taking the resources out of those poorest communities to fund the juggernaut of the government, of the municipality. And the person is living in that environment, being stopped by cops every 2 or 3 days, then it's going to have a negative effect on their health, on their blood pressure, their self-esteem. They're going to develop a cardiovascular disease, all because of living in that kind of environment. And then if you have food deserts, and if you have a McDonald's, a Wendy's, a Burger King, instead of markets where you can buy fresh fruits and vegetables, then that even compounds the problem. And that's what you see. If you are a medical practitioner on any level, that is what you're seeing. That is what is being presented to you when a person comes to you that is sick in those ways. Yes, it's the diet. Yes, it's the lack of exercise. Yes, it's the overstress. But why is it that people have the poor diet? Why is it that people are overstressed? Why is it that people are overworked? Why people have poor self-esteem? Why people are not as educated as they could be? And there's a reason behind it. And people who study these things, they're pointing at a system that has been designed, that is perfectly created to produce the kind of result. Now, in the Caucasian communities, in the upper classes, they don't have to deal with that. But in the lower classes, they have to deal with that. But they don't have to deal with racism. So for the people who are darker skinned, on top of all of the McDonald's and Burger King and the socioeconomic disparity between the rich and the poor, on top of that, the poor class have to deal with racism. So it's like a double whammy. Anti-Black racism and negative health outcomes. And this is from a flyer that I put together. I'll share it with you at the end. Did you know that Health Promotion International classifies anti-Black racism as a public health crisis? So it's now not only seen as an issue of a social issue. It's now being classified as a public health crisis. So as healers, we have to know that. And the reason why they're calling it a public health crisis. So if racism is a public health crisis, then what about if you put, I think that's the next point, what about if you put instances of police brutality or microaggressions or living in a racist society on top of that? So you're fighting two public health crises. Did you know in the first 8 months of 2020, Black communities around the globe were responding both to the COVID-19 pandemic, and we're not discussing the issue of the COVID-19 pandemic. It started in a lab, Fauci and his insanity and all of it. Is that the whole hysteria around COVID-19 and dealing with racism together is a serious issue in the African American community or communities of people of African descent. And new instances of police brutality, George Floyd protests, on the US mainland, which negatively impacted the health of those communities. Did you know experiencing race-related stressors is associated with the following negative health outcomes? Mortality. And you may not see it, grandma died of a heart attack. She had diabetes, she was overweight. You might not make the link there. But then if you're gunned down by a cop for reaching for your wallet, which we have instances on tape of this actually happening. Another one is Philando Castile. He was stopped by a cop, and the cop comes to the door of the car. He told the cop, listen, I have a gun in the car, and I have a license to carry that gun. Not only do I have a gun, I have a license to carry that gun. Okay, get the license, get your driver's license, get all of that for me, and get your license, get your driver's license, get your registration, get everything. So he goes, he reaches for the license. Cop pulls out his gun, boom, shot him in the chest, kill him in front of his girlfriend and his kid. So in an instant like that, you can see how mortality is a serious issue in confrontation with racism. What's not so apparent are the chronic diseases that emerge due to being in an oppressive environment that is actually leading people to early deaths. And that's your diabetes, your cardiovascular disease, your obesity. That's from the poor diet, and that's from lack of exercise. And if you are working or living in an environment where you have to work all the time and you don't have time to take care of yourself, you don't have time to do exercise, you don't have time to relax, take active time for relaxation, you don't have time to meditate, you don't have time for any of that. You're working all the time and you're dealing with the stressors of the environment of which you're faced. And so this environment, and people already know this because they say it all the time. We've been dealing with this from generation to generation. You've also been dealing with the effects from generation to generation, meaning the subtle effects that is contributing to producing the disease that is causing the negative health outcomes. And this is from this source, Health Promotion International. Now we're going to go to this article. the effects of racism on health and mental health. So we need to stop the share again. Okay. And so these are important things for us to know as healers. Remember, I was saying that we are dealing with an environment that humanity has not dealt with before. The average toxicity of the average human cell today is not the same as it was in ancient times when you didn't have environmental pollutions and poor food, meaning processed food, GMO food, food that's sprayed with Roundup and other chemicals. So you're dealing with a much more toxic environment. And the toxicity also relates to human interaction, how human beings relate to each other. What are the effects of racism on health and mental health? Can you all see the article on the screen?
Nee.
Okay, Dua. Racism or discrimination based on race or ethnicity is a key contributing factor in disease onset. I think now this, to me, when I first read this, is an interesting statement. It's saying that racism discrimination is a causative principle in disease. It is not saying that racism discrimination enhances disease, makes disease worse, which it does. But here it's making a strong distinction. This is the first sentence in the article. A key contributing factor in disease onset. So you take someone who does not live in an oppressive society, and you put them in an oppressive society, along with changing their diet, whatever, and the stresses of racism, and what you're going to have. You're going to have a person who has become diseased. And people of African descent, the African Americans, have been living under this environment for centuries now. And people want them to pull up their bootstraps and get over it. And the issue is there has to be some kind of healing system process for people of African descent to go through. It is unreasonable to think that people are just going to get over it after you've been living in a disease environment for centuries, from generation to generation, under the attack of your person, simply based upon the color of your skin and where your recent origins are. Because your recent biological origin is in Africa, but your essential origin is with Nebuchadnezzar. That's your essential origin. But this society cannot see past the recent origin of your existence. Because this society is sick, this society is deluded, this society does not truly know or understand what religion is, what spirituality is. And what's being passed down from generation to generation to the Caucasian side is a delusion of racial difference and racial aggression and racial superiority. And that's fine if they want to do that. The problem is that it is, you know, looking at this and thinking about this closely, you find that people who are inculcated with the idea of race identity and race superiority, the delusion becomes so magnified that it actually turns into a state of violence, or the propensity for violence, or the desire for violence of the other, based upon nothing other than the color of a person's skin. So the principle of race alone is causing negative emotional states and conditions that are harmful to you because of how you look. But it's not anything that you are doing. It is a state of condition of how you're being perceived by a deluded mind. And if they want to be deluded, that's fine. The problem is the mind doesn't work that way when it comes to race and racism. The mind converts that sense of racial identity superiority and transform it into states of aggression and actually states of violence, to where a person can actually suffer state-sanctioned violence because the whole system is corrupted by racism. The whole system is infected by racism because the system was built on racism. It is also responsible for, so if you know someone or you're working with people, you have to be patient as a sunum, as a healer, in helping them to heal themselves and to heal their body. Because from the vantage point of the gene system and the epigenetic effect of the pressure, the downward pressure of the environment, is going to take time for people to heal. It's going to take time for people to get over their diabetes, to get over their high blood pressure, to get over their obesity, because the gene system has been so negatively impacted. It's going to take a lot of work to reverse that and actually to purify the unconscious from the experience of the oppressive environment. It's going to take a lot of time. So as healers, where your standpoint should be one of patience and understanding and compassion and actually humility. The African American experience is an extraordinary experience in the history of humanity. And these people are to be respected because of what they have gone through for so long and have still maintained a certain sense of identity and achievement within the oppressive environment. I remember one time, to give you an example, I at this point, I still do, I guess. I like to wear nice shirts. I buy nice looking shirts or whatever. And I took a flight, I think it was to New York, or yes, it was to New York. I remember it was a little chilly when I landed. And this older gentleman, African-American gentleman, was like a porter. So he was helping me and I was asking him questions about where to get the rental car, or whatever. And he could see that, you know, I had a nice shirt, but it was no big deal. It was just a phase I was going through. You know, I had a nice shirt, whatever. And I was already in the teachings at this time. And the shock on his face when I actually treated him as a human being. I actually called him sir, actually told him thank you. And not only the shock, but the it's not so much the thank, but the acknowledgement. He's being acknowledged. Okay, you understand, you get it kind of vibration. These people are to be respected. And so we as healers, we have to be empathetic with the process that they're going through, because they're going through a process. And as healers, we're trying to help them to heal themselves so that they can, discover that they're not their bodies, which the society has been imposing on them for centuries. You are your body, you are your body, you are your body. You're black, you're black, you're black, with the racial epithets that goes along with it. And that is very damaging. It's damaging from the perspective of a strong sense of self-confidence, strong sense of self-identity, but it also damages the psyche, and it grounds people into their physical nature. It removes them from their sense of higher consciousness. And yet, if you go to the Black Christian Baptist church, the way they sing and all of that kind of thing is dualistic, but it's like an experience when you go there. But the point is they're going through a process. So they have to go through dualism to discover non-dualism. And when you are helping them to heal, you're helping them to clear their bodies so that they can discover a higher reality. Like a person that I'm helping right now, she was actually a pastor in a church. And for the past month, I've been helping her on a vegan diet. And she said through the vegan diet, her mind is clear, is more lucid. And just from the diet alone, she is changing her diet alone, she's questioning the structure of her Christianity. I started to share some of the mystic side of Christianity with her. She's saying how it all makes sense, et cetera, et cetera. Before the change of the diet, saying certain things to that person will not be able to make it in. Either there's too much there, too much impurity. So you have to give it time. You have to allow people to go through their process. And realizing that, it's an evolutionary process of the soul through reincarnation. So people were many things, but in this lifetime, they have identify themselves as Black, whatever. And so they adopt the Aryu from the past. They adopt the Aryu of being a person of African descent. But you can also adopt the higher Aryu, the Aryu of ancient Kemet and the glory that was there. It is also responsible for increasing physical and mental health disparities among Black, Indigenous, and people of color. How does racism impact our bodies? And I kind of like this diagram that I put together. Poor sleep. And we know that when people are not sleeping well, that their bodies are under decalibration or miscalibration, and that people need to sleep to calibrate the brain, and in turn, not only calibrate the brain, but to siphon out the toxins from the brain. You need sleep to do that. And by doing that, the brain becomes recalibrated. And through the recalibration of the brain, the rest of the nervous system, through the vagus nerve system, becomes recalibrated. So all of the body organs are recalibrated during sleep. Now, a person is not sleeping well, you might as well call that a risk factor or even a carcinogen. You have to make sure that you get enough sleep so your body can recalibrate itself. You know, take the mother whose son has just been shot by the police. She's not going to be sleeping. The community is not going to be sleeping well. Like take this other one, Tatiana Jefferson. Now think about this, the impacts of this on a whole community. She is with her door open in her house. She's in her bedroom playing a video game with her nephew. So she's a caretaker of the nephew and the caretaker of the grandmother. So she's has taken on the responsibility of taking care of the family while getting into college to become a doctor. Someone calls and says, please do a wellness check on her. The door is open and it's late at night. The police shows up, didn't announce themselves, and kills her, shoots her through her window. And she's, you know, and she got shot. So now the whole community is shattered because of that. How many people in that community actually got a good night's sleep after that, for the full year after that? Along with all the other people who pay attention to these kinds of issues. How is that impacting them? Not to mention what happened to the community in Buffalo, New York, when the white supremacists went into the grocery store and gunned down elderly people, actually. Was the community getting enough rest? Was the community sleeping? Was the community in good mental health after that? And then that leads to cardiovascular disease. That leads to people overeating, becoming obesity. If you're not sleeping, you're overeating, you're eating the wrong foods, you're going to become inflamed. Inflammation is going to build up in the body. Your stress hormones are going to be all out of sync, and you're going to be pushing adrenaline into your body more than is necessary. So you're going to be in a constant fight or flight or grief. So the depression is going to come in as well. So blood pressure is going to go up. Coronary artery disease is going to be generated. And then you have this slew of psychiatric disorders such as depression, anxiety, PTSD, the eating disorders, etc. So the point I'm trying to make with this is that there's a whole chain of events that occurs in the physiology of a person of African descent when they're confronted with these instances of overt stark experiences of racism. And it's not just in that one community. When everyone saw George Floyd get murdered, you know, that affected all communities with any kind of internet or access all over the world. And you can see how it affected many people, and not only people of African descent, but it also affected Caucasian people with outbursts of rage and anger at how this could have happened, etc. And some of that anger, you know, is justified. You know? So there was something I wanted to go down here in this one. Health inequality and racism. The above research review examined evidence linking mental and physical health outcomes to 3 key mechanisms of racism. It found that people can experience health inequality through structural or institutional racism, the processes of racism embedded in policies, laws, and societal practices that give advantages to racial groups deemed superior, while racial groups deemed inferior are disadvantaged. For example, structural racism in the criminal justice system can lead to poorer health outcomes. Second one is cultural racism, the spread of the ideology that certain groups are inferior through language, values, media, and symbols. For example, racist stereotypes can influence the housing decisions of white property owners and lead to racial segregation in neighborhoods. And the problem with racial segregation, even during segregation in the 60s during Jim Crow and all of that, is that if you're going to be segregated, fine. If things are equal and you have equal quality schools, equal quality access, equal quality medicine, equal quality housing. But during these systems, and this was also evident in South Africa during the apartheid years, that the segregation is not equal as far as resources are concerned. And as was said before, the Black Americans, they were fine with segregation. They didn't really care because they were building their own communities and doing quite well. But when those communities were burned down and destroyed, then what other choice they had? They're not going to stay with the poor schools and the poor housing and the poor recreation and the poor medicine. So then their leaders started to rise up. So people like Martin Luther King and advocate for the end of segregation. But before the neighborhoods were being destroyed, most African Americans were just going about their lives. So the cascading events, that's what I'm trying to share with you, that it's not just one or two instances. And your experience of racism in whichever way you have has not been, it's not an isolated incident. It's a whole cultural structural system that has led to that, and also the indoctrination that has led to that experience that you've had. So you're up against a whole cultural, structural machine. The point then becomes, how do you live a life under those conditions and not have your health deteriorate to the point where you're suffering these kinds of diseases, when you should be physiologically optimizing your body and its energies and its forces. So as you get older, into older age, you could settle into a reclusive, meditative lifestyle so that you can, at the end of your life, you need a strong, healthy body to do that. So at the end of your life, you can, you can transcend it all, and then you don't have to worry about these issues. My whole idea is how to not be affected negatively by these pressures. This can create communities of concentrated poverty with worse housing and environmental conditions. Individual level discrimination, where individuals or companies discriminate against racial groups, whether intentionally or without intent. This can result in worse access to employment, education, and medical care. So on an individual level, these are issues you have to work around. And by work around, I mean, where are you going to find like, let's say you're raising children, where are you going to find, and for yourself as well, if you're young enough and still going through the educational process, where you're going to find the quality education and the quality medical care. So it takes research, it takes digging, it takes thinking about these things, and also employment for yourself, where you can take care of yourself and pay bills and do all of that kind of thing. And then it affects physical health. There is considerable research to suggest that the stress that comes with experiencing racism can have long-lasting physical effects. And we spoke about those already, some of those already. Also, a 2019 study found that racist experiences appear to increase inflammation in African American people raising their risk of developing chronic conditions such as heart disease and kidney disease. On a mental health level, depression, stress, emotional distress, anxiety, PTSD, suicidal thoughts, all from the experience of racism. In the 2015 meta-analysis found that the association between racism and mental health is twice as strong as a link between racism and physical health. That means that the effects of racism is compounded mentally over physically. So it's causing serious psychological issues, psychological damage that would not be there otherwise. Of those researchers sampled, BIPOC who reported experiences of racism also experienced the following mental health issues that we just said. Okay. So now we're going to go over to the other source. So this is an issue, this is an article you can find online. You can do more reading through it. I'll put it in the chat. And we're going to go to the next one. Let's see how we're doing on time. Okay, hold one moment, please. Someone's trying to get on this, so they didn't have the link. Okay, so let's come out of here and go to here. This is a little longer video. We'll play the whole thing, and then we'll play another video, and then we'll come back for discussion. We're kind of running low on time.
I hope you're doing well today. Thank you for your support. Thank you for subscribing to the channel. Thank you for your thumbs up, for your comments, and thank you.
And this one is why Black History Month is triggering to so many.
For sharing the videos. Thank you for all you do to support the channel. Well, I'm back here to ask the question, what is triggering about Black History Month? When I go through my internet news, I just see incident after incident of people doing very horrendous, really, and insensitive things during Black History Month. Not that they don't do them throughout the year, but it seems like they make a special effort during Black History Month to let the world know that it's Black History Month and they don't appreciate it. One of the things that I thought was really terrible was in Rockland County, New York, at a middle school, a company, and I guess they outsourced their lunch. The company that brings their lunches to the school brought in fried chicken, waffles, and watermelon. Now, this was sort of a dig at Black people. First of all, I have already said, I like watermelon, I like fried chicken, and I like waffles. And so does everybody else, because if people didn't like it, it wouldn't be so plentiful in the United States. Everybody likes watermelon, everybody likes fried chicken, and most everybody likes waffles. So putting that combination of together to try to humiliate Black people is very uncreative. I'm surprised I didn't bring some collard greens and pig feet up in there. I mean, that would have really set it off, I think. And then there was the situation, there was the incident at the Catholic school in Philadelphia where they're dressing up in blackface. That's what they do when you don't know anything else to do. Dress up in blackface, call somebody the N-word, and try to drag as many Black stereotypes into that scenario as you can. And then there's another teacher that's been suspended for doing some horrendous thing. I just believe that white Americans lack cultural variety. They don't have enough things in their culture that truly entertain them. And that's what I truly believe. All of these are white people. They don't have enough creativity. That's why they've gone into Africa, into Egypt, trying to take the Egyptians' culture, the culture of the ancient Egyptians. If you are a European, why the hell are you in Africa trying to look for your history? Your history is in Europe. Oh, I forgot. We went back and created a whole lie that put Europeans in Africa. So there's a lack of creativity. There is a lack of innovativeness and ingenuity. So I got to do something that works. And calling somebody the N-word, it works. Dressing up in blackface, it works. And I guess taking foods that you think that Black people like and trying to make mockery or trying to make fun of that works for them. But there is a real problem with white Americans, and they don't address it. They don't address it. They won't address it. But there is something wrong when your self-esteem is dependent upon putting somebody else down. Now, when we were growing up in the South, older Black people would say slavery did more harm to white people than it did to Black people. Booker T. Washington wrote about this in Up From Slavery, and he saw the difference as the damage being done to Black people as physical, but the damage being done to white people as psychological. But as young Black people growing up, we didn't buy it. It's like, no, they didn't do damage to white people, it did damage to us. The older I get, the more I realize there was psychological damage done to white people. First of all, because Black people were doing so much of the work and the inventions and just about everything that needed to be done, they did not test their abilities to be creative. They did not test their work ethic, most of them. And so now they are stuck with the belief that they're superior to everybody, except that everybody is outdoing them. The angels are cleaning their clocks with the tests. And Black people are doing everything else. Everything else that they try to do, Black people will outdo them, even when the playing field is not even. So I believe that there has been psychological damage done to white people. I honestly believe that, and I'm not trying to be mean. I believe there's psychological damage that was done. And they circumvented and get around it by reinventing and rebranding stereotypes. And trying to say, no, it's not me, it's you. Because look, you're Black, and I'm going to put on blackface, and I'm going to humiliate you. Now, some Black people absorb that. But I learned early in life not to absorb the hatred coming from white people. Our schools integrated in the middle of my high school experience. So I was taken from a segregated school into an integrated school. And I had an incident there because the kids kept calling us the niggers. So one day, something happened and I sort of snapped. And I had an incident where I struck another student. And it was a male student. That's who was in my face, and that's who I hit. I went home and I was really upset about it because I got into an altercation and I was not a fighter. And the principal threatened to suspend me. And normally my mother and father would have had a fit, especially my mother, if I got into a fight at the school. So I was afraid for my mother to even know that I got into a fight. So my mother had to come to the school and talk to the principal. And so my mother went to the school and the principal told my mother if she was a white girl and she did something like that, I would suspend her as if she was giving me preferential treatment. And so my mother said, well, my daughter is not a fighter. We've never had any trouble out of her in school. She's always been a good student. So if you feel like you need to suspend her, then do what you have to do. And my mother's tone of voice really surprised me because her tone of voice was saying the problem is not my daughter. The problem is here. And I was shocked. My mother was not mad and she did not scold me and I was not punished. The principal did not suspend me, but when I went home and my mother told my father what had happened, because my father was at work, then my father wanted me to go back to the black school because I had younger brothers there. So he wanted me to go back to the school where they were. I was tempted to go back, but my mother said, she said, well, that's what they want her to do. They want her to run. My mother used the word intimidate, but she said something that meant intimidate. They're trying to intimidate her. So she said she can go back to the black school if she wants to, but if it was me, I wouldn't go back. She said I would go to that school, hold my head up high, do what I was supposed to do, and they could call me all the niggas they wanted to. And that was my mother's way of handling it. And I thought about that. What stood out the most to me was my mother saying they want you to run. They want to intimidate you. They want you to feel like you're not as good as they are, that you can't do the work that they can do. So this is their way of doing that, calling you a nigger and doing all this blackface and all the kind of stuff that they do. My father was upset by the whole thing. He didn't like the idea of integration anyway. So his feeling was it's not worth it. Go back to the black school and be done with it. I talked to my dad and I said, I really want to go back. I said, because I can do the work. And I don't want them to feel, I don't want to feel like they ran me off. And my dad said, well, you can't be up there fighting. You go back up there, you're going to have to take it. And I said, well, that's what I'll do. I'm not going to be in any more fights. So I went back to that school and I did my work and I held my head up high. And to this day, I'm probably one of the most successful people that came out of that class. I never let them intimidate me again. Eventually, they closed the black school. And my brothers, and by then, I have a younger sister, went to the so-called white school. And they excelled at that school. They excelled academically, socially. My sister was in the band. One of my brothers was like the star of the football team. Another one of my brothers was president of the student council. My third brother was a representative for the school at the state convention. I have 4 younger siblings, and all of them did well academically, graduating at the top of the class. 2 of them graduated at the very top of their class. My father said, you set a good pattern for me. So my father came around. But it has to do with not allowing these people to intimidate you or make you feel that they got something over on you because they're willing to do something low down to humiliate you. It's about processing what they're doing, but not absorbing it in a way that it does damage to you. And that is what all of this is. This is about intimidation. This is about them trying to get attention. They don't want the attention to be on Black people. They want the attention to be on them. They'll do whatever they have to do to get the attention. And speaking on those white girls at that Catholic school that had dressed up in blackface, in the article, they were making the claim that this was going to do so much damage to the Black girls in that school. Those girls that are dressing up in blackface and trying to embarrass those Black girls are doing much more damage to themselves than they are to those Black girls. This picture was taken from the 1960s. This young Black student, and there were others, were being heckled by these white students. And look at the anger and hatred on those white students' faces, mostly white girls. That picture went viral not because of what the Black girl was doing, but what the white girls were doing. This is your answer to how much damage it's going to do to Black girls. It's going to do more damage to the white ones because this picture is forever etched in the American psyche. And it's not about Black people being mean. It's not about what these Black students are doing. They're just trying to go to school. It's what the people behind them are doing, the people who are following them, heckling them, using racial slurs. That's why this picture is viral. So the white folk are the ones, they don't have to live that down more than the Black girls. Those white girls are revealing who they are. And that is very instructive for Black people. Now, some Black people could see that and won't process it correctly. But again, as Maya Angelou says, when somebody shows you who they are, believe them the first time. So those Black girls are getting a first-class experience about how things can be. And once they learn how to take it, you have fixed yourself for life because nobody will be able to get to the place that they're trying to get to. They're trying to get to your soul. They're trying to damage you. And once you learn how to take it, they can't damage you. So I think the Black girls will be just fine, especially if their parents are talking to them and nurturing them and giving them the support that they need and teaching them about what our ancestors went through at the hands of these very same people. And they haven't changed, but we have changed. And we have to continue to evolve for our own growth and progress. And if they want to stay stuck in the past, let them stay stuck in the past. Our goal is to move forward towards the future and the future that we want for ourselves. So what we can count on when Black History Month comes around is that the freaks come out and they come out swinging. And it's usually going to be the same.
Okay. I was going to play the other video right away, but although her analysis, let me stop this. Although her analysis is not as sophisticated as it could be, she made some very important points, actually. And the idea of not absorbing it and processing it properly, that is a very, very big idea. In fact, that's, she may not know it, but that's dispassion, that's detachment, that's indifference. This is kind of a yogic practice that she was explaining. And realizing that and the Buddha said something about this. The Buddha said that when you take a knife, when you say a bad word to someone, cussing them or whatever, it's like taking a knife and stabbing yourself in the chest. But if you feel bad or you feel hurt or you feel depressed or you feel injured because someone says something or do something, then you're allowing yourself to be in a place that is not necessary from a perspective of the higher mystical truth. And so you have to come to a place where this passion and detachment is removed from it. And the reason why is because essentially you're not your race. You are not Black, as they say. That's a social construct that have been put on you. And if you allow it, it will circumscribe you to the world. It will circumscribe you to an individual identity. And you have to realize that if they're not hurting you, if someone's not burning down your house or coming at you with a gun or trying to hit you or punch you, that what they're doing is actually hurting themselves more than it can ever hurt you. if you have a true understanding of who you are and how things are. If you relieve yourself of, and that's the problem with racism, is that it is causing, in the perpetrator and in the victim, is causing a circumscribing into the notion of an individual identity. And since essentially you are soul, then your body is not your true identity anyway. And if anything about you is individual, it's the soul. And the soul has no color, no gender, nothing that is perceptible to the senses that can be circumscribed in time. And this is why I'm trying to use the time wisely. There's I'm skipping something that is important that we should go back to. We can share that. This is why I wanted to share this chant that you've all heard before. So Neb Medu, it means all words. Neb Jedu, all those words that are spoken about me, Rasu. And the important point to gain from this is all the words that are spoken about you. So all the negative, all the, like the lady was saying, they can call you all the N words you want, but you don't absorb that. You don't take that on as an individual identity. So if someone calls you a disparaging remark, is like, who are they talking to? They're not talking to you because you are soul. They're talking to an illusory expression of a principle that is derived from your mind, which is your karmic basis, which is your Ari. And since they are projecting a notion of reality on your illusory body, you don't have to adopt that. You don't adopt the notion of the illusory body as an absolute identity. And your own mind, that's how you work with your own mind. If your own mind is saying, oh, I'm stupid, well, can your soul actually be stupid? So all the words that are said about you that is coming from an external source or from an internal source, they have no value on the reality of who you are, which is soul. And all of the, if you understand that, and you call for this protection, the Neteru will stand up for you. The Neteru will be on your side. The Neteru would work their cosmic magic on your behalf, no matter the situation, what the situation can be. And from the perspective of race, because it comes in many forms, the microaggressions, the little jokes that you hear. And it might be in a subway and the looks that you get, or someone might bump into you, intentionally just because. All the little microaggressions, well, all of that is illusory. All of that is just stuff, and it has really nothing to do with you. And you allow the Ari to take care of it. So if you don't get in the way of the Ari by becoming angry or depressed or sad, the Ari is going to take care of it. Meaning, you allow it, it's just going to bounce off of you and it's going to go in the other direction. A person is they're going to experience something because of that negativity that they're projecting onto you, because they're living in delusion. But you don't have to adopt that delusion. You have to know yourself as a higher mystical reality. And all of that stuff just falls off. And in certain cases, it's very difficult to do. Like, how would it be if you knew someone personally that was actually physically injured or hurt or killed by an act of racism? You know that it is there, you know that that is the cause. But then again, the Ari is at play. And if it happens, Ma'at has sanctioned it. And you have to work within the higher mystical truth. And it doesn't mean not to fight against it. In fact, the very fact that it's happening, it means it's compelling you to fight against it. And that fighting against it is doing something for you that cannot be done that the perpetrator is not getting. There is something that is occurring within you in fighting against it that is building your character, is building your strength, is building your sense of morality that the other cannot have. Aha neteru demdiu. Aha means to stand. Neteru means gods and goddesses. This means that the gods and goddesses will be there, all of the gods and goddesses together, demdiu, together. So you have an army. Your army is a metaphysical army of the cosmic forces. And now we're talking on the individual level of how to protect yourself in this environment so that you don't fall prey to disease processes because of the ignorance of others. And in your senti, your spiritual compatriots, this is a kind of discussion that you can have with regards to this kind of environment. So if you allow the ignorance of others to harm you, what does that say about your spiritual practice? What does that say about your spiritual understanding? And you are trying to achieve the status of optimal health, not just baseline health, but optimal health, optimal physiological conditioning of your body, so that when you start to encounter higher forces in meditation, your body can handle it. And when your physical body gets stronger and you meditate more in depth, that strengthens your ka body, your astral body. And your astral body helps you to meet the soul, and the soul helps you to meet the ah, and through the continuum of the spirit. And the problem is that if you get caught in the realm of the body, then you'll be caught in the world. And that is the most insidious, damaging nature of racism. And making you to think of yourself as a Black person. You're not Black, you're a soul. In fact, you're super soul. You are, and in fact, science corroborates the idea that race is a social construct. It is not a biological determinant of any reality. So you're Black because people created a system that classifies you as Black. And the reason why they had to classify you as Black because to justify within themselves. So they had to classify you as Black, and then they had to define Black in a negative way so that they can justify to themselves their maltreatment of you. And if you take that on, if you correlate with that, meaning you say, okay, I'm Black or whatever. You're buying into their insanity and their delusion. And what is happening is that you are to be free from all delusions and all insanities to the best of one's capacity to reach a higher status of a higher realization of the truth of who you really are. So basically, they beat the spirit out of the ancestors, the knowledge of the spirit. Some escape, some still maintain a certain sense of spirit, so they practice Yoruba, or they tried Santeria or something like that. But basically, that's what we're trying to do, to beat the sense of the reality of the indwelling spirit soul out of your conscious awareness and turn you into an animal and bring you down into the world. Why? So that they can build an empire. And then you are to see yourself as who you are, to be released from that psychological conditioning, which is illusory and has no bearing on reality of who you are. You are not a slave, and you were never a slave. No slave was never a slave from the perspective of the higher mystical truth. So you don't have to act that way. You don't have to interact in the world with that in that way. You can speak up. You can talk to the other person on an equal footing. Nelly Fuller, in his book and in interviews, he talks about how if you have two 15-year-old kids in the same class and they're studying the same subject at the same time of day with the same teacher, the information is constructed in such a way that the Caucasian 15-year-old is being taught how to be superior and aggressive and on top. And the same lesson is giving a different lesson to the dark-skinned kid, teach him how to be submissive and weak and feeling insecure. The same lesson is how the educational system is designed. And so when Black people interact with white people, even though they don't realize it, if they examine themselves closely, you're doing it from a sense, even now, from a standpoint of it being inferior. The other person is somehow, because they're white, they're somehow better, or whatever foolishness they want to say. And the teaching is telling you that that is nonsense. It's just another human being, and they're probably even worse than you are. And the teaching tells us that in the hymn to Amu, tells us, thou art Temu, meaning Tem, creator, who did create beings endowed with reason. Thou makest the color of the skin of one race to be different from that of another. But however many may be the varieties of humanity, it is thou who makes them all to live. It is saying that all human beings come from the same source. The same spirit is within all. So there is no rationality in you acting inferior or feeling inferior. It is not rational. And it's not logical. And it's not the mystical reality. You're to feel and express and be just as equal as the other. And if they want to call you uppity or whatever term they want to put on you, that's not a problem. That's not your problem. Like the lady was saying, that's not something that you have to take on. That's for that other person or those people to work out for themselves. That's not your issue. And that way you don't take on a life where your heart is getting enlarged because it's beating so hard because of fear emotions, because of anxiety emotions, because of feeling inferior emotions. Because who's standing up for you? Collectively are the gods and goddesses, the Neterun. So let's go to this one by Janet Helms with the time that we have remaining, which is very good.
To be a
We're going to listen to her.
So if it's post-traumatic stress that collectively people of color experience, both on a policy level with systems and the kind of interpersonal racism that gets expressed because people are socialized by a racist viewpoint that they might not be aware of, like, how is it that you deal with that trauma that's just ubiquitous, it would seem to me, amongst anybody of color in the country who've grown up in this environment?
And that is what I try to help people do, to acknowledge that, in fact, that there is this trauma. The mental health field for such a long time has assumed that what works for white people would necessarily work for people of color, particularly Black people and Indigenous people, without recognizing that the traumatic experience of one group is not the same for the other group. So the interventions have to change so that we help the people of color. And one way the interventions have to change is by acknowledging their experiences of trauma rather than minimizing them, and then to help them externalize them. Because when the world says to you, you're wrong, you don't experience this pain, then it's difficult to get over it. But if the world, the powerful person, says to you, I hear this pain, I understand this pain, and let's see how we can work through it, then that has a different kind of outcome.
What are your thoughts about the practitioner provider's willingness to really change the viewpoints? Do you have any kind of favorite stories you could share with us?
It's sometimes something as simple as a white therapist in training who comes in and says, in effect, I don't know how to treat this client of color. What do I do? And so it's in the process of helping the therapist in training recognize that it's not a matter of thinking about it in terms of how do I treat this client of color, but rather thinking about it in terms of how do I treat this person. And so it's helping, in this case, her to begin to think about why it is that she conceptualizes this person as someone who needs something different than a person who was white would need. And when I say that, that might sound contradictory to what I just said to Patrick. But what it does mean is that whatever the person looks like who's sitting in front of you, you would usually diagnose their trauma and treat it. But often we think because there's a brown or Black or whatever color skin attached to the trauma that we shouldn't treat it. So what I try to help the therapist do is to recognize how she sees the world influenced by how she saw that client. And then as she begins to do that, she begins to be able to untangle the system issues. So why is this client feeling traumatized? What does it have to do with the system that the client is interacting with? It also has to do with her orientation why does she automatically assume that she would be helpless to work with this person? And so that's her white socialization. How do we deal with that? And then there is the actual dilemma of the client. Has the client internalized the trauma that he or she experienced? Presumably they have, because to be working with a mental health professional, something happened. And so now we have to begin to figure out how the trauma has affected that person.
Okay, and there's another part of her presentation. Okay.
I think the question, however, is more a question of awareness for. I think the question, however, is more a question of awareness for white people, because I think that for the first time, perhaps many white people became aware that these kinds of things happen. It was not unusual for Black people to tell their stories and to have people say, well, you must have done something wrong. And to some extent, that's what they said in response to the George Floyd incident. But I think the fact that many white people essentially were confined to quarters and so therefore had to witness this event, for them that helped them to think about, at least for a short period, that the system was not working fairly for Black people. But we always have these competing forces in our society. One force wants things the way they are. I call that the force essentially of white heterosexual male privilege and power. And the other force wants to change and become more humane. So what's happened is that I'm afraid that the awareness is dying and the privilege dimension is gaining a stronger foothold in the society. And that to me says that there's still a lot of work to do. And particularly the people who were aware have to do that work. They have to come out of hiding. They have to say what kind of society they want it to be.
Well, we're working on.
Okay, so some important points that she mentioned was being able to not hold it in and speak about it. And if you have someone that you can talk to, if you have experienced any traumas or any discomfort around how you are related to or treated, causing any discomfort or anything, it's important to talk about this and to talk about it with people that understand you. Because again, it's not on you it's on you to figure out how to go beyond the issue to continue your spiritual process and your spiritual progress. But it's not on you particularly to change other people or to make them see the light or to help them to see their racism and things like that. That is a burden that you should not take on, because that's an additional burden. Your burden should be how to healthily live in this society, with in the condition that it's in. And it's good if people see it and recognize it and are aware of it and are able to be allies. But it's too much pressure, stress to think that you have to end the racism, because you have something greater to end. that cyclical existence, meaning dying and being reborn, coming back again. And that is your mission in this lifetime. However, if you have dark skin, you are faced with racism, and you have to know how to deal with it and how to handle it. It takes deep thought, deep thinking, deep understanding to learn how to deal with it in a way that doesn't negatively affect your health. And it goes back to our profound spiritual teachings of dispassion, detachment, and indifference towards people and their ignorance, and allow yourself to be free of it. You're trying to free yourself from the delusion of race and identity. You need to just discover the higher mystical truth. And, like I said before, the real issue with race from the perspective of the soul and racism is its capacity to have you identify with your body. And for a spiritual practitioner, that is very dangerous. On a fundamental mundane level, you should not be putting yourself in a position to be traumatized or to be abused by people. And some people you don't talk to, don't interact with them if you see that they have a certain kind of tendency. You don't have to talk to that person unless you really have to in a work environment or something like that. And then you don't spend lots of time with them. You just keep it to work, keep it to business, and leave. Like Muhammad Ali, when he was younger, how he used to fight. He was very elusive. You couldn't hit him and so forth. Or he won't spend much time with you. And that's what you have to do. Not spend much time with people who are messed up. People who are this way are messed up. And there are a lot of Caucasian people that have worked on themselves and there's this guy, his name escapes me now. He grew up in a racist family, actually. And he was telling the story of how he had to seriously work on himself to change the racist conditioning that was given to him. And there was this other lady as well. She has a video excerpt on YouTube, but she's mostly on TikTok, a white Caucasian lady. How she was saying how she grew up in a racist family, and how she understood the African American experience. And she was talking about how she had to really, go deep to remove the racism from herself. So there are people like that, but there are much more people who are going along with the stuff, the messed up stuff. And so as healers, you have to remain cognizant of what the goal of our healing mission is for ourselves and for others. And that goal is to allow people to be as healthy as possible for their own spiritual well-being, so they can have a healthy body, so that they can explore the depths of the mind and the limitless spirit. Okay, so that's the presentation. Right on time. Are there any thoughts, questions, anything anyone wants to say before we log off? Good, bad, indifferent.
Ucha, I thought it was a very enlightening presentation. One of the points that you made that I've always thought about is the impact that racism has on white people and how you kind of use words like delusional. Malcolm X had this thing about, the chicken come home to roost kind of thing, and how the violence that has been directed at Black people has kind of come back at, and is kind of manifesting in different ways in white society. And looking at it from a kind of Natarian point of view, it seems like, it goes back to just the spiritual ignorance and their lack of awareness of their own divine selves that, is a basis of all of that. So the healing, I think, is not only for, indigenous people, but them as well. They might be in more need of it than anybody else. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, it's a fair point. It's a good point. And you might make that, I think it's a fair point. And the people who are suffering the most are in need of the most compassion. And the people who are suffering the most in this society are the darker skinned people, particularly those of African descent. And that's what I was saying, that these people are to be respected and you have to have patience with them. This comedian, Louis C.K., something like that, he was on a show one day, and he was saying, and they were talking about racism. And he was saying, if a Black person is upset or angry, just chill out. You have to remember, just a generation ago, if he's a certain age, just a generation ago, his grandparents were oppressed, were slaves or whatever. And they're the people that needs the compassion, that really need the empathy. So they are really suffering. But I agree with you. The dominant culture is in need more of healing, and but they are in need of correction as a whole. Yeah, it's more correction, but healing and nurturing through that correction. That is very, very damaging. From the perspective of all people who are not enlightened are ignorant, and that ignorance is going to cause suffering, and that suffering is going to manifest in many different ways. So, all of humanity is in need of, if they're not enlightened, in need of healing and nurturing and respect and compassion. Well, when we bring it down to a dichotomy of the dominant culture and the people who have historically been maligned in this culture, I mean, so if you really go into some of it, some of the violence is horrific, is horrendous. We speak in terms like burning down this and that, but the lynchings and the hangings and feeding Black babies, children to alligators as alligator gate so that they can catch the alligators to get their skin. It's really happening. There's a story that's so, and that's why people don't want to talk about it. That's why they're so afraid of critical race theory, because they would have to acknowledge the depth of the depravity that has happened. And most people are not ready to hear it. They're not ready to face it. Like an alcoholic doesn't want to face it, he's an alcoholic. There's one where this older man, African-American man, actually was telling this story. I think that was told to him by one of his parents who were slaves. And they were talking about how this white Caucasian man be walking around with a bucket, basket, and wondering why he's walking around with all this bucket and basket. He was walking around because he would steal the African American babies, the little babies, their children. He would just walk up to someone if they have a baby and take it from them. And then they would go at night and they would feed the stolen babies. They would use them as alligator bait to get alligators. And it was known in the community that that's what this person was doing, him and the people that was doing that. So people had to like hide their children, protect their children, and things like that. Or when they would take a man, tie his legs, tie his arms, and have horses in opposite direction, and beat the horse, and to rip a person apart. I mean, the violence is extreme and horrendous, and people are not ready to talk about it. The problem is that if it's not spoken about, if it's not brought out, is the subtle discrimination and the systemic nature of racism will remain. Because if it's spoken about, if it comes out, then people will question the system that allowed it, and that question the system that has been ignoring it. People will have to question that, and they would have to change the system. And there are many people that don't want to give up their privilege. It's really a dark, very dark era of human history. And people are not courageous enough yet to go there, to talk about these things, to try to heal humanity. And so the dominant culture is in need of correction. But like a person, an ignorant person, they cannot be corrected until they go to the sage. They have to go to the sage and say, "Sage, I'm dumb, I'm stupid, I'm unenlightened, help me." And then they take the correction. Similarly, there has to be a humility and a willingness to learn and to change on a group level for things to really change. They have to come and say, "Hey, what we've been doing is wrong. We have to make society equitable, and we have to change. How can we do that?" But at the end of apartheid in South Africa, Nelson Mandela and Bishop Tutu attempted this with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. When the apartheid regime, the people who upheld the apartheid regime, and the police, the soldiers, had to come and speak to the people that they hurt and killed or whatever, and people from the other side who reacted to that, who committed murders and atrocities too in the rebellion, in the guerrilla war, when the blacks were fighting an underground war. And even during the era of when the guerrilla war was given up by the ANC, people did things, to white people or whatever, and everyone came together in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and they spoke about it. The problem is that Mandela wanted to safeguard the economic infrastructure, and actually, by doing that, the white power elite maintained their power in South Africa because he didn't hold people to account. All they had to do was say what they did, and that was fine. And I think that was a mistake. That was wrong. In Nazi Germany, they did not do that. In Nazi Germany, at the trials afterwards, when the SS and the Nazis went to the Nuremberg trials, they admitted to something, they had to go to jail or they got executed. Lots of them were executed, and a lot of them went to jail. And some of them, they escaped to Argentina and to the United States. But you see how it was handled. You see what was handled there. People were held to account. In South Africa, people were not held to account. In America, people don't even want to talk about it. So it's a serious issue. And if they get to the point where, if they can get to the point where they can have a truth and reconciliation type, it's not the best, but at least it would be a wider acknowledgement that is necessary. So yes, from the level of the soul, they need to be healed and brought to the light in recognition of their higher nature. But that's something they have to want to do. No one dragged you into Chautauqua. You came willingly and you stayed. And that's how it is in the spiritual field. People, you don't get dragged. No one grab your hand and bring you to the temple. You recognize something is messed up about life or something is messed up about yourself. Well, like me, so I went to the temple. How can I solve these issues? You go through the process of solving the issues. Similarly, for the culture to reach to a higher humane level, it has to go through the process, and it must want to go through the process. Like the judge who sentenced the guy who shut up the supermarket in Buffalo, New York. She laid it out plainly. She told everything that happened. And she was exhorting the society to look at itself. How many people are going to take her words seriously? And she used the opportunity as a judge, which is a very powerful position in American society, to say the truth. And she said the truth. Now, the lawmakers, are they going to follow up on that? How can they when their system of empire is based on racism? You can go and bomb people in Iraq saying they have weapons of mass destruction. They don't have any weapons of mass destruction. It's just that you want the oil to maintain the empire. All of that will have to stop. Because all of that is built on racism. The war in Afghanistan, almost 20 years, all of that was built in racism. And Barack Obama participated in it with his drones, the drone warfare. And all of that will have to come crumbling down. It would have to stop if you were to truly look at the racism and the structure of racism. And they don't want to go there. There's racism is what keeps the empire afloat. As long as if you're brown or you're black, they can bomb the hell out of you. But now, and if you're Caucasian and you have a different political ideology, they will fight each other too. And they will fight each other on ethnic differences. But also they will fight each other over resources. And the problem is that they're coming from a degraded culture. That you can't call it a degraded culture. They're coming from a culture that has not sufficiently evolved. So it's very destructive, very egoistic, very much in duplicity and dichotomy, differences. They don't see the underlying spiritual essence of things. All of that will have to stop. And if that stops, then the military-industrial complex will not make its money. When Kennedy tried to stop the Vietnam War, what happened? He got a bullet in the head. And the Vietnam War was a racist war. To uphold the military-industrial complex. They were making big money from that. And there were forces that didn't want that to end. And Kennedy, being the president, was trapped in the system of white supremacy, although he had certain good intentions, but he was trapped in it. So he sent soldiers to Cuba in the Bay of Pigs to fight because the Russians were bringing nuclear weapons to Cuba. And so to uphold the empire, he had to defend that. So in essence, he was defending white supremacy. And at the same time wanted to end the war in Vietnam because he thought it was unjust. And he also wanted to bring back the gold standard, to back the dollar by gold. And people, certain powerful people did not want that. So he went like Martin and Malcolm. He got a bullet for his troubles. In the case of Malcolm, he got many bullets for his troubles. The problem, the issue is, how are you going to let that system impose its will on you? And that's what it's trying to do. It's trying to impose something on you that is essentially illusory. And its imposition negatively affects your health. But if you realize that you are the indwelling spirit essence, and that you should not allow the I would say the soft racism to impinge on your sense of peace, then you'll be okay and you'll go beyond it. And you'll discover the truth behind all things, and you can let the illusion go. But you have to understand the nature of the beast. And racism isn't everything, because that's how the system is maintained. Right? If you want a pair of nice Nikes, someone in Indonesia or China had to make that shoe for 10 cents a week or something. And this is what Malcolm X was talking about. At the end, Malcolm X and the Black Panthers were saying the same thing. They're saying, and Martin Luther King too. They're all in one accord talking about how the system of capitalism was inherently oppressive, oppressive mostly to brown and Black people. Is inherently oppressive, and they wanted to build an egalitarian society. They wanted to build a society that was equitable for everyone, and bringing people together. The Black Panthers were having discussions with poor white groups, and were building a coalition of the poor. Malcolm X started to do the same thing when he came back from the Hajj. He came back to the United States. And Malcolm X and Martin Luther King got together, and they were going to sue the government of the United States for slavery and Jim Crow and racial discrimination. Well, you know what happened before that could happen, because they were not going to allow that to happen. And the Black Panthers, they got infiltrated and they got broken apart, and people got killed because they were going in a direction that's an antithesis to the dominant society, the racist capitalist structure. And so the whole idea is, how are you going to live a life in a way that you're not going to allow that monolithic structure, that machine, to impinge on your cosmic awareness of your own divine nature. Okay. So do I, everyone? Anything else?
Pooja, this is Aspirant Jasmine. Much good for the presentation. One thing that I have been working with is kind of it. Okay, so I moved from Richmond, Virginia to Petersburg, Virginia. I moved from Richmond, Virginia back in like May of 2021 because I didn't feel comfortable living in the city anymore. There was a lot of gun rights people, marching in the streets, basically a lot of white males with AK-47s just marching in the streets because, it's the Southern capital, Virginia, whatever. And I didn't feel comfortable living in the kind of I guess the RU of the city. It was a lot of, Richmond, Virginia is very racist and very oppressive, especially towards Black people. And the longer I lived there, the more I became like, I have to leave. And so I moved to Petersburg, Virginia, just because of my budget, and the housing prices are a lot more affordable. So I was paying about $1,200 in rent for a 3-bedroom house a month. Actually it was like $1,400 in rent for a 3-bedroom house a month in Richmond. And then I moved to Petersburg and I was paying like $690 for a 2-bedroom duplex. So I was able to save a lot more money. And Petersburg, Virginia has more Black people, I guess. So it was a city that was founded by people who who were in captivity, and a lot of them freed themselves, and then after emancipation, a lot of Black people came to Petersburg. So I was excited about that, and it still has effects of racism, just because the government is corrupt. So I guess this is a long comment. One of the challenges that I've been facing is, like, when you talked about Tamir Rice playing in the park, is finding safe parks to go to with my children and just be out in nature. A lot of the parks in Petersburg are run down, and there's a lot of drug activity, and there's like condoms on the ground, and I don't feel safe. So I've been trying to find a park nearby. So I went to this other city nearby. It's called Colonial Heights. And my children, we were walking down a trail, and there was these white guys fishing. And my son likes to fish. I don't teach him how to fish. Well, he likes fishing. He's like, oh, he caught a fish. So, my youngest, Joshua, he's a very like personable child. And this man was like, I just felt the racism dripping from him. Because usually when children are like, oh, I'm fascinated by what you're doing, people are like, oh, okay. But I felt a lot of danger from this character. Like, he was glaring at my son. And so, and I had thought it was a safer park because I'd been there a couple times. So that's my challenge, is, like, just finding safe places for my kids, or what to do in the meantime if I can't find a safe place. And also, there's another park I go to. It's probably about like 15, 30 minutes away. And it's a lot safer. There's the people that are there are more diverse. So you have like Indian families, Hispanic, Asian, white, Black, it's a more diverse mix. The one in Petersburg is just mostly Black people, and moms are in their cars smoking weed while their children are playing in the playground. And then the white city next to Petersburg is like racist like they could be in the Klan, basically fishing in the middle of the day. So that's my current frustration right now. And so what my takeaway is, you know, follow the leading of like understanding people's, like, don't be around degraded people or people who are giving out the low vibration. So I will have to make a sacrifice and drive a little further, because before I'm like, I live here, I should be able to be here. And I'm seeing that it's better to make sure I am in a whole safe place. And if I have to drive a little further, then I would rather do that. So, you know, I definitely appreciate the talk. And my next step is I'm trying to, one reason why I moved to Petersburg is so I could save up money to buy some land, and thinking about like how our people had, you know, developed communities, and then it got burned. That's like a hidden fear of mine. Like if I buy land and have a farm, who's to say and I'm a single woman, that some white guy is going to come and try and like attack me on my property, or like racist white neighbors. So that's my other thing, is like trying to find like land and in a safe place. And I think I'll follow and you mentioned that it was mostly like it's a twofold thing. Like it's either the government or it's the poor white people that, so just to make sure that I don't buy land in a space that has poverty, because poverty brings its own negative RU. So those are my two long takeaways. Okay, and much do you're really helping me sort out some stuff in my life that I'm navigating as a single Black mom with children. Well, I'm not going, again, see, you're helping me because I'm not going to identify with that. All right, I'm going to stop talking and do a head tap.
Okay, that's it. Yeah, make sure you do your research and really think about it and figure things out. You'll be fine. Okay, so we can unmute. And we'll do our closing chant. Nebmedu, nebjedu, erda suda neptedu demdiu. Nebmedu, nebjedu, erda suda neptedu demdiu.
Nebmedu, nebjedu, erda suda neptedu demdiu.
Nebmedu, nebjedu, erda suda neptedu demdiu.
Nebmedu, nebjedu, erda suda neptedu demdiu.
Nebjedu, erda suda neptedu demdiu.
Nebmedu, nebjedu, erda suda neptedu demdiu.
Oh, patan, 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 patan.